So, I'm an American. My ancestors came on the Mayflower, and I've had family in the New World ever since. I've always had an America-dominant view of the world. Now, you might say that's simply because I have such long roots here. After all, the last name Hicks may not be the most attractive family name in America, but it is one of the most common. This is the home of my people for 400 years. But could it be more than that too? Today on Something's Happening Here, we will see that maybe, just maybe, there is a deeper reason why America has such a dominant image and role, not just in my life, but across the world. So put on your prophecy hats, friends, for today's show called The Beast from the Earth. Welcome back, friends. Today is Tuesday, if you're watching this in real time, and we've got a fun show for you today. At least it's the kind of show that I find to be fun. We're going to spend most of our time in the Bible. We're going to be in the book of Revelation primarily. So Revelation is my favorite book to study. I think it is an amazing book. Like you think you know everything about it, and then it humbles you again. So we're going to spend time in that amazing book, and we're going to be learning. Well, I don't want to give it away, but Revelation chapter 12 and a little bit of chapter 13 is going to be our focus today. And to set up why we're going there, I want to go to our article for today. It's not even really an article. It's a discussion forum, and it's Quora, if you know it, Quora.com. And it asks a question that I kind of asked in the opener, right? I said that my entire worldview, absent of God's kingdom, right? But my earthly worldview is 100% America dominant. And, I said, maybe that's just because my roots are here for 400 years, but also maybe there's a deeper reason. So this person on Quora is asking a very similar question. Why does it feel like everything happens only in the US? And in fact, every answer that I read, except this first one, takes to because you're an ignorant American kind of position. Because America is all full of itself, And the first answer does that too, but at least it's more... it's less of an insult, I think. There is something about the United States of America that has always set it apart from the rest of the world. It was the very first of the British colonies to break away in independence. So there's that. But also, as the rest of the world has progressed toward the kind of globalist, secular, humanist kind of position that it's in right now, America has not really been part of that journey. We have always been the kind of exception to everything. In fact, American exceptionalism is often derided as a position of arrogance, like, I think I'm exceptional and you're just average, right? But really, all that is saying is that America is the exception. That's why it's exceptional, right? So the rest of the world uses the metric system, but we've got 12 inches to a foot, that kind of a thing. Why is that? Let's go to Quora. This first answerer says, I live here, meaning the US, and I can admit that USA tilts the cultural scales. Point number one, we have a massive consumer economy. Our citizens and corporations buy everything constantly. Paying customers equals attention. Point number two, we're kind of cultural narcissists that expect everyone to make a big deal out of us. Someone shouts, hey, look at me. You're probably going to look at them, even if they have a garbage healthcare system and everyone can buy unlimited guns for some reason. And then point number three, and you can tell the age of this post, right, by this comment. We just elected a reality TV game show host with no prior experience as our leader. I mean, hell, you try to avoid watching this garbage fire. I think, tongue in cheek on that last point a little bit, but I think generally this is right. America, the American dollar is, at least for now, the global currency reserve. If it were not for America, World War II would have ended differently. If it were not for America's reconstruction efforts after the war, the entire world would be different right now. If it weren't for America fending off the Soviet Union, the world might even be communist. I mean, America, the imprint that the United States has had on the modern world, at least since 1940, is unarguable. You'd have to be asleep for 3 generations to not understand that. So that's true from a point of view of kind of the world. All of those things are true until relatively recently, like until my generation, movies came from Hollywood. And sure, I mean, other countries made movies too, but all the movies that you knew were from Hollywood. You know, The Marriage of Maria Brown, excellent German movie from the 1970s. Do you know that movie exists? Of course not, right? So it's only been recently that Hollywood has given up its monopolistic stand for the entire wide world. America is where things happen, and there's a spiritual reason why. Please join me in Revelation chapter 12. Now, I'm going to quickly run out of time if I don't do this more briefly than I would like to, but the chapter 12 follows the church of God's people from the very dawn of time until the very end of time, right before Jesus comes. There are some symbols you need to understand that are commonly used in Bible prophecy broadly and apocalyptic prophecy, like Revelation and Daniel specifically. One of those being that the figure of a woman is used to represent churches, or a church or churches. And you get this maybe most clearly from Ephesians 5:25, where husbands love your wives, even as Christ loved the church, right? And so Paul is setting up that parallel right there. But you see it also when God called Israel his bride in Jeremiah, I think chapter 4. So that's why. So when we see a woman in prophecy, we have to be thinking about God's people. It is representative of a group of God's people. We use the word church. That's not always accurate, but a group of God's people. When we meet her in chapter 12, she's pregnant. The baby inside of her would be Jesus, right? The only one that the church gives birth to. And so if the church is still pregnant with Jesus, we're looking at the BC era of time. And when we see this woman in verse 1 is dressed like a saint. I mean, she's clothed in the brightness of the sun. She's standing on that which reflects the brightness of the sun. She has a crown on her head of 12 stars. 12 is the number of the church. She is the pure church. She is representative of whatever group of people has the fullness of the truth of God at any given moment in time. And we read in verse 3 about a war in heaven, where the devil is scooping out some of the stars of heaven for himself. And we understand that is understood to mean angels, where he's actually taking some of the holy angels of God onto his side. And then he tries to devour Jesus at the end of verse 4. That would find its fulfillment in Herod the Great, ordering the genocide against baby Jewish boys. Verse 5 is the entire life and ministry and death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus Christ, all in one verse. Verse 6 then is the woman fleeing from some sort of danger that happens after Jesus goes away, and she stays there 1,260 days. From there, we have a bigger picture of the war in heaven. Tells us it was between Michael and the dragon and their respective angels. It tells us the dragon was cast out as a result of that war. He found his new home in the world. And so this war in heaven has to have happened before the creation of the world, because at the creation of the world in the Garden of Eden, the devil's already there in his fallen form, right? And so all of this, you can see how this whole thing is a prophecy that stretches the entirety of known time. And it does skip back and forth. Like we have the war up there in verse 3, and then it shows up again in verse 7. There's a linguistic reason for that. Revelation is not written chronologically. But you see that when you find the starting point of the war in heaven, the events which follow happen chronologically. So the war in heaven in verse 7, the falling of Satan and his angels in verse 9, And then the cross is verse 10. Now salvation, strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. And verse 12, because of the cross and the victory there, the devil is now trapped on the world. He has come down to the earth and he cannot leave anymore. Unlike in the Old Testament, he seems to have been able to go back to heaven, at least to visit, as we see in the first 2 chapters of the book of Job. So he is now here and he's mad about it. Verse 13, we have again the woman fleeing to a foreign place. I guess that's verse 14. But verse 13 tells us why. The devil really hates Jesus, but now that Jesus is in heaven and he can't go to heaven, he can't get to Jesus anymore. So he goes instead after the woman, God's people. Verse 14 tells us how she flees, just like she did back in verse 6, and for the same period of time. Times and half a time is the same period as what we read in verse 6 as 1,260 days. And maybe we'll circle back to that if we have time, but that's a long period of time that encompasses the Middle Ages, like the entirety of when the church was kind of the emperor over Europe. And verse 15, the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman. Now, water is another symbol that we need to understand. Revelation 17, verse 15 tells us that the water represents peoples, nations, multitudes, languages. So like the kind of mess of humanity all at once. And the devil is trying to get to the woman, but she's hiding for a long, long, long time. And so he spews water out of his mouth. He spews a mess of humanity from everywhere he can gather them out of his mouth to go after the woman, to flush her out of hiding, that she might be carried away. Now, verse 16 is the whole point of why we went through this. The earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. So let's quickly go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 10, and understand that what is the earth? If the earth helped the woman, what's the definition of earth? Genesis 1:10, God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called sea. So the woman had to flee because of water, and she fled to the earth, which is the absence of water. Put on your history hats, friends. Where did the European believers go when Europe got too crowded and full of persecution? Where did they go that had a relative lack of civilization, lack of population density, was not in any way like the Europe from which they were fleeing? They came to the New World, didn't they? That's right. They came to America and also a little bit up in Canada, right? But they came to North America, the New World. Well, what does Revelation 13 tell us is going to happen? Now that we've established that the earth, prophetically speaking, represents the new world, the lack of peoples, nations, languages, and multitudes. Chapter 13 tells us in verse 11, I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. A beast is a symbol of a government or kingdom, and this is true all the way back to the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. So what we're reading is that prophetically, John sees another nation rising up in the new world. And that's going to look like Jesus, going to have 2 little horns like Jesus. And I realize that probably looked like a devil, which, I mean, was not my intention, except that the sentence ends by saying that this nation speaks like a dragon, right? Like a devil. So it's going to be lamb-like. It's going to look like Jesus on the outside, but on the inside, when it speaks, when it does stuff, it represents the devil. That is the prophetic picture of the United States of America. We're going to look like Jesus for a while, even while we say demonic things, say and do demonic things. But there will reach a point past which that speaking like a dragon will be the dominant factor. All looking like Jesus is going to be swallowed up by the demonic things that happen here. So when we saw yesterday that America is demonstrating its fall from grace, it's openly displaying its hostility against God's people. This is what that's preparing us for. We're on a one-way road towards speaking like a dragon. I know this means that we have always spoken like a dragon, but we're not, I think, in the fullness of Revelation 13 yet. So any dragon speak that's happened already will be worse by the time we get here. Even if there was not such a high humanitarian cost to the kind of hatred against Jews that we're seeing, and there is, I'm not saying there isn't, there definitely is, but I'm just saying, even if there was not that humanitarian cost, this is why anti-Semitism in America is such a big deal. This is why being fallen from grace is such a big deal, because it's setting us up to be on a road from which there will be no recovery, and for which the only conclusion will be the return of Jesus Christ. So that's not a very happy place to end, but I hope it helps to ring the alarm bells in our minds. Like, we can't just keep this up. This whole, hatred against the Jews thing is not just a political moment in time. It means so much more than that. And we're all going to find out what it means sooner rather than later, I think. But I want you and I to be on the side that knew what it meant enough to not have to get the wrath of God as a result of it. Let's love everybody. Amen. But let's also choose to be on God's side, no matter what. We can't stop what is prophetically guaranteed from happening, but individually, we can be surrendered to God. We can accept the beauty of salvation, and we can look forward with joy to the soon coming and soon appearing of Jesus Christ. Let's pray. Loving Father, it is a heavy thing for me, 400-year ancestral resident of this wonderful nation. It's difficult for me to understand where you have promised this land is going. And yet you have promised it. So steel our hearts, S-T-E-E-L, steel our hearts against that day and prepare us for the even greater day when you will come to take us home. And Lord, protect us against any thoughts at all that will put our loyalty here on the earth when we know there is nothing for us here except death. Give us your vision of the future, Lord, and seal us for that great day. Amen. Okay, and before I say goodbye to you, friends, I got to make sure you know how to join us again tomorrow. So on Facebook, please like the page where you're watching this. On YouTube, please subscribe to the channel and also hit your notification bell. It's a two-step process. On Rumble, hit your follow button, please. And on Locals, you're already a part of the community if you're watching this on Locals. Please prayerfully consider becoming a paid supporter. That really helps us a lot. You can also go to talkingdonkeyinternational.org/podcast and stay tuned because we will have a new website shortly, and I'm looking forward to being able to tell you all about it. May God bless you. I hope you have a good night, and I will see you back here for more Something's Happening Here.